The mother, looking anxiously at her watch, turned around. "Kate, did you feed the dog?" Kate nodded and glanced at her watch anxiously too. It was almost 6 in the evening. Her stepfather was supposed to be home any minute. He always came in from his shift angry and hungry, and anyone who got in his way got a fair amount of insults and poking. "Go to your room, Dale will be right back." Mother nodded at her watch again, hinting that it was time to hide in order to avoid meeting an angry and disgruntled man. "Mom, I'm not going." Kate defiantly sat down at the kitchen table. "Last time I heard everything that happened after he came back. I won't let him talk to you or act like that anymore." Mom smiled weakly and shook her head. "We're nothing against him, you know. If Eddie had been with us, he would have stood up for us. Of course, but on the other hand, I'm really glad that he left for the army in time to keep me and Dale apart. Now, do you want to take his place, Kate? I beg you, go to your room." There was a pleading sound in her mother's voice, but Kate had given herself a word that she would not be affected by anything her mother said. She was afraid of her stepfather, the man she herself had once chosen as her companion, hoping that she could change him. But each year, Dale became scarier and scarier, and at times, he had little control over himself, terrifying everyone around him. The key jingled in the keyhole, and her mother turned pale, making another sign to Kate, but she shook her head negatively. The poodle, called Michelle, hid under the sofa in a jiffy. He was also well aware of what awaited him when the front door opened and the frightening man walked in, who might kick him or even throw a chair at him. Pale, tense, Kate and her mother looked toward the exit from the hallway. There was the clatter of falling boots, there was a loud scolding against those who had placed their shoes in the middle of the hallway, and in a second, a huge, tall man entered the room. As he was taking off his dirty work jacket and tossing it on the floor, my mother immediately ran over and picked up the jacket. Dale, without going into the bathroom or washing his hands, immediately made his way to the kitchen and sat down at the table. "Give me something to eat," he rumbled in his voice and then his fist on the table. Kate, who was sitting in front of him, flinched but didn't make a sound. Her mother ran into the kitchen and started carrying from the stove to the table, first a plate of soup, then a plate of buckwheat and bread. "No meat again?" Dale asked glumly, as if he didn't know that meat was a very rare thing in their house. "No meat, honey," tried to justify her mother, who was already trying to feed all the family members and the rest of the household as diversely as possible. "It's expensive, you know that. And whose fault is that?" Dale clenched his fist and pounded the table again. "I said, who's to blame?" Kate, feeling herself within both fear and a desire to confront the pressure of this unpleasant man, answered for her mother, who was silent and staring at the floor. "Well, certainly not your wife." Dale shifted his gleaming gaze to the girl who had dared to say anything and clenched his teeth. Grains of buckwheat fell from the corner of his mouth and landed back in his plate. "Who cooks the food?" he asked, addressing his question to Kate, and the girl realized that the master of the art of turning an arrow would blame her mother anyway. "I cooked, darling," the mother replied quietly, trying to take the hit. "There you go." Dale scooped buckwheat into a spoon and shoved the entire contents into his mouth. "Since you're the cook, then you're the one who's to blame for the lack of meat in the house. So, you answer." This style of communication had been developed by Dale year after year and had improved over time to, "It's everybody's fault, and I'm the white and fluffy one." This style of communication annoyed Kate at times. She was annoyed by her own mother, ready to tiptoe in front of this man who had long ago lost his human form. While Dale was sober, he was angry and looking for someone to blame, but as soon as he drank, he found them and brought his judgment, and it was scary and disgusting at the same time. Kate knew that her mother had married Dale for reasons that were almost beyond her control. She was pregnant by a man who had left her with a 2-year-old son of her own, no money, and no way to return to her parents' house. Dale proved himself almost a hero by taking in a pregnant Lauren and her son Eddie, and Kate, not yet born by that time. Kate didn't know her father, but she knew Dale well, with whom she had lived every year of her 17-year life, and saw how he was changing, becoming more aggressive and scarier every year. Kate had begged her mother many times to leave him, but her mother didn't have the courage. She thought she would be lost with the children, and no amount of persuasion worked on her. Even now, with Eddie in the army and Kate about to graduate from high school, it would have been easy to pack her bags and flee this hell without a backward glance, but Lauren didn't want to change anything. The victim complex developed over the years under the pressure of aggressive Dale made her mother a complete spineless maid who would give anything just to please a man who was impossible to please. Kate dropped her hands, promising herself that as soon as she finished school, she would leave for the capital, get a job there, and take her mother right away. And even if she had to inject her with sedatives or sleeping pills, but Kate would definitely take her from the clutches of this tyrant who not only behaved abominably but also considered himself a victim of the system. Dale worked at the local firehouse. His job was not easy, but it was not the root cause of this changing character. Kate guessed the reason for this behavior was the man's parenting by his father, the same tyrant his son had become over the years. In the beginning of the relationship, as her mother told her, Dale had not been like that. He was gentle and caring. He happily raised Eddie, was a great helper with newborn Kate. He walked with the children, helped with household chores, he was considered the first handyman in the village. But over the years, he began to turn into a terrorist who kept the whole family in suspense, from his mother to the unfortunate dog. At what exact moment this transformation occurred, Lauren no longer remembered, but she had grown accustomed to putting up with his course of events over the years and did not blame Dale for anything. At the same time, she felt a terrible sense of guilt towards her daughter and son, Kate, who is now sitting next to Dale and trying to bring Dale to his senses a little, was once again convinced that it was useless. He lived by his own rules, known only to him, and he didn't give a damn about what anyone else thought or felt. And it was his fault there was no meat in the house because they lived solely on his salary since he would not allow his wife to go to work, and his meager income from working at the firehouse was only enough for buckwheat and canned fish, maybe a beef stew max, and only on holidays. But he blamed it on Lauren, and every night when he came home and didn't find a piece of meat on his plate, he began his old song about how wrong mother was spending his paycheck, that if she had kept more accurate records of income and expenses, he, Dale, would have meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. And he didn't know that Kate herself had taken a part-time job at the country club, where she cleaned the sets and the stage to earn a little money. To avoid walking around in ragged rags, she wanted to look feminine and attractive as a girl of 17 who already liked a man from the parallel class, but so far all she had managed to do was provoke ridicule from her classmates. Right as stealing cutlets again, her classmates laughed when Kate walked between the tables in the cafeteria and picked up half-eaten cutlets in a bag. These cutlets Kate gave to Michelle, who though was a poodle was still a dog who wanted to eat meat. And if Dale had made her and her mother and brother vegetarians, it was strange to change the dog to cabbage and onions. "I don't steal them," Kate snapped back. "I take them with the cook's permission. And then, out of greed, you eat around the corner." "I've seen it," Joy, one of the richest children in the village, had teased her. After all, her mother was chief accountant at the collective farm, and her father kept a fleet of tractors and harvesters. "You couldn't have seen it," Kate replied at the time. "And if you did, next time wear glasses. They say that happens when you put a lot of makeup on your face." The girl sitting next to Joy smiled. But when they saw their main girlfriend's face, they immediately made serious faces. "What a trashy inright," Joy muttered, tossing her fork at Kate. "You say something like that again, and that fork will stick in your mouth." "Watch yourself first," Kate retorted, tying the bag filled with cutlets. "Otherwise, you can't see well." The hatred of Joy mixed with contempt was the main reason Kate hated going to school, dressing poorly, and sometimes wearing the clothes of her neighbor's daughter, who was already studying at an institute in the capital, and sometimes passing her mother things for the girls in the village. Kate felt like a misfit who had to constantly stand up for herself in order to keep afloat among her classmates. She had no friends for this very reason. As soon as any of the girls got close to Kate, they were immensely put on a blacklist. From this list, Joy insulted her victims in the presence of her entourage. The only thing that pleased Kate was the fact that the young man Joy liked, who also liked Kate, was indifferent to the rich and arrogant blonde, pretending that she did not exist around him at all. His name was Myron, and he was the son of an ordinary worker in the village. His mother worked in a sorting shop, and his father was a combined harvester. Myron had an excellent upbringing and had his own opinions, which most often coincided with Kate's. Together they attended the literary club, which Joy had recently begun to attend as well. And it was then when Kate turned her attention to an interesting young man, and the reason for her liking Myron was not his interesting appearance, but his thoughts about life and his attitude towards the actions of literary characters. On several occasions, they chatted with Myron. Kate expressed her support for his words, which the teacher did not like. Myron was surprised that some girl from a troubled family out there understood the same things he did and even found additional arguments to support her. Kate knew he was going to pay attention, and she always listened diligently to his words and to those of the teacher during the discussion of literary topics. These circles became a real relief for Kate, but as soon as Joy began to show up, all her desire to study actively began to pale in the face of Joy's attempts to draw attention to herself. At times, she looked so silly in the eyes of both the teacher and the other kids who attended the circle, but the rich blonde didn't seem to care much for her. The main thing was to attract attention. It didn't matter which way it went. Kate, who survived Dale's dinner, who tried again and again to blame her mother for the lack of meat on his plate, sighed with relief when he tossed the spoon into his plate and went to watch TV in the room. There was still a lot of swearing directed at what was being shown on the screen, and that meant that now all evening Dale would be glued to nothing but what was on TV. "How's your prom dress, Mother?" asked Kate, standing near the sink so that no one in the room could hear what they were talking about. "I've put the fabric aside. In a week, I'll make an advance payment, and I can pick it up and give it to the seamstress," Kate answered dreamily, imagining what she would look like in the dress she had decided to make for her prom. She had seen it in an ordinary fashion magazine, and she saw it and immediately fell in love. The next day, she ran to her neighbor, who was in the repair and tailoring business, and asked her if she could make such a dress for the prom, which was only 3 months from now. Mrs. Osgood stared at the picture for a long time, then twisted Kate in all directions, then clucked her tongue and nodded. "I can, but the fabric doesn't come cheap. The fittings aren't cheap either, and my work is not cheap, you know. It's a big village, and I'm the only one here," Kate sighed, but when she heard the price, she nodded confidently. "I'll make it. I've already done the math in my head," Kate said. "And the fabric?" Mrs. Osgood asked. "It will cost more than my work," Kate said. "Now, wait," Mrs. Osgood rummaged through her sewing purse and pulled out a card. "Here's a discount card for you. Our store will give you a 10% discount with it. Don't thank me. At least you'll get to wear something new for once." Kate smiled and thanked Mrs. Osgood. She rarely received gifts, so even this little thing was a real treat for her. The fabric was set aside. The fittings were already in a bag on the top shelf of the closet. It remained to give the fabric and half the cost of the work of Mrs. Osgood, and her mother suddenly held out money to Kate to give the seamstress everything she needed to sew the dress. Both the money and the fabric, just so Dale didn't find out about it. When Dale went to bed, and he went to bed early because he had to get up at 5 in the morning, Michelle got out from under the couch, and everyone in the house breathed a sigh of relief. Kate ran off to the club to work, and her mother was able to sit down for a part-time job, despite Dale's ban. Lauren worked part-time on the internet. With the help of a small laptop, she wrote coursework and dissertations on Russian language and literature. She'd worked at the school for 10 years until Dale decided that his wife shouldn't have a job. It was with his hard-earned money that Kate's dream of sewing a gorgeous prom dress came true. On her way to the club, Kate met Myron. He smiled at her and stopped by her. The girl was surprised. Usually, they just said hello as they passed each other. "Are you aware of the news? A real journalist from the capital is coming to our class the day after tomorrow." Kate was not up to date, for there had been no time for class in recent weeks. She was actively working, and Joy's presence in the class discouraged any desire to be there at all. "I didn't know. A good journalist? Really good?" He knows the president himself, has interviewed foreign celebrities in general. He is a super well-read and educated man. Not young, really, but he has so many interesting things to say about his profession. Would you like to be a journalist? Kate asked with a smile, herself dreaming of becoming a translator or at least an English teacher. Of course, it's an eerily interesting job. So much traveling, so many new people and faces. By the way, this journalist is sponsoring our school, and now our younger kids can work on new computers, some kind of wizard. Kate looked at Myron, who looked up dreamily. Does that ever happen? Myron asked. Of course, it does. Good people do good things. Kate thought long and hard about Myron's words, mentally agreeing with him. She mopped the floors in the studio, got the rehearsal room ready, moved a bunch of heavy sets into the back room, and then managed to get her paycheck for the month from the receptionist. She tried to give the money to her mother, but Lauren shook her head. Save it for the bouquet and the hair. I won't be able to add to that for you anymore. The next day, Kate picked up the fabric and handed it to Mrs. Osgood. The feeling that prom was coming up, and she would be wearing a beautiful dress and then going straight to the capital away from Dale warmed the girls' hearts. Myron's words led her to take a class in the literary circle, for she was interested in all the things Myron himself was interested in. Oh, and right, Joy, stretched out, sitting at the first desk and sprawled across 2 seats. It's been a long time since we've seen you. We thought you had cutlets poisoning, the girls laughed, and Kate walked past and sat in her usual window seat. But Joy, apparently bored with the barbs, continued her attack. Who are you going to prom with? The stoker? Joy asked. It's not your business, Kate muttered, taking out her notebook. The teacher entered the classroom and admonished the girls. Joy immediately sat up straight, glancing at Myron, who came in after the teacher. He walked past Joy, who was holding a seat especially for him, and sat down next to Kate. Joy's gaze was full of hatred, and Kate smiled when she saw the young man next to her. Guys, today we have an important guest, Word of the Century's Journalist of the Year, a man who has traveled the world and is ready to share with you the most interesting things from his practice. Mr. Leo Bowman, an older, overweight man with glasses, entered the office, and Kate remembered that she had seen him a couple of times on television when Dale was rude about someone the journalist was interviewing. The man looked around at everyone present and said hello, then he asked which of those in the circle would be interested in a career as a journalist. Myron raised his hand, and then Joy's hand went up. Young man, tell us what you know about the work of journalism and journalism in general. Myron began to tell, and Mr. Leo Bowman watched with curiosity as the young man recounted some pretty interesting things he had learned in the course of his studies. You're promising, but you lack confidence in your voice. Your voice needs to sound so that no one will think to contradict you, Mr. Leo Bowman said. Myron nodded and sat down next to Kate. Joy's hand, which had been raised, went unnoticed. The journalist talked for a very long time about his work, the difficulties and achievements, the ups and downs. Then he asked for questions. Kate raised her hand. Tell us about what you consider to be the biggest mistake you've made in your life. Mr. Leo Bowman looked at Kate in surprise, then said, No, I won't rant along about the oddities of working in journalism. We are all different people, and some of the things I learned from people, rich and famous, will remain a mystery. But one thing I can say for sure is that the biggest mistake I made personally was my attitudes toward my own children. I failed to explain the basic rules of life to them, causing them to make a lot of mistakes. Kate's answers seemed vague, that's why she didn't focus on it. In the evening, when Dale was not yet back from duty and her mother was fiddling around at the stove making him stewed vegetables, Kate shared with her mother an interesting encounter with the visitor, the journalist Mr. Leo Bowman. Mother crouched on the edge of her chair and almost fell off it. Her face expressed concern. What did he say? Kate recounted her question and his answer. He didn't say that for nothing, her mother said thoughtfully, wiping her hands and getting up at the stove again. Why? Because he's my father. Kate almost jumped up in her chair. What do you mean, father? My grandfather, her mother nodded indifferently. That's right. He's your grandfather, who kicked me out of the house when I got pregnant from a schoolmate, kicked me out without giving any help at all. I was 18 years old, I didn't know what was going on in my life, and he kicked me out, saying, "You learn how to make babies, you learn everything else." And now it turns out he thinks it was a major mistake. It was his mistake that cost me my happiness as a woman and your bright future. By the way, a miserable journalist who teaches everyone about life without knowing anything about it himself. Kate sat there as if struck by a stroke of thunder. She didn't know who was right and who was wrong about the situation, but she needed to see Mr. Leo Bowman right away. The girl ran into the school and dashed past the principal's office, shared voices coming from the teacher's lounge. One of them belonged to a journalist. Kate flew into the teacher's lounge and stopped in front of the journalist. "Enright," shouted the literature teacher. "What do you think you're doing?" "My name is Kate," said Kate as if she couldn't hear the teacher. "My mother is Lauren Enright. Does that mean anything to you?" Mr. Leo Bowman was quiet for a few minutes, then stood up from the leather couch where he sat, surrounded by other teachers and the principal. He coughed and held out his hand to Kate. "Nice to meet you, Kate. And I'm Mr. Leo Bowman. And I understand I'm your grandfather," Kate nodded. "Now, I'll go away. I won't disturb you. I just want to tell you that the mistake you're regretting is living in very cramped conditions under the oppression of a real monster. Perhaps in your old age, you will have to make some more decisions concerning your family, which has no claim to anything." Kate came out from the teacher's room and sat down on the stairs. For some reason, she remembered Michelle standing on his hind legs for a piece of the school cutlet, and that memory made her even more sad. There was a knock at their house when Dale was just finishing his vegetable stew, or calling it meat. Her mother flinched, and Kate stepped confidently into the hallway and opened the door. On the threshold, as she had anticipated, stood Leo with a bouquet of flowers in his hands. "Your daughter's there," Kate said as she let the journalist into the house. Across from her sits the man who has ruined her whole life, and her granddaughter and grandson's life also, and a dog who is not a member of the family at all. Kate's grandfather smiled weakly and made his way inside. Kate heard her mother shriek from the hallway, as well as Dale scolding, who, recognizing the famous journalist as his guest, could only mutter curses that had little to do with the arrival of an important person. The next day, Mr. Leo Bowman left, and 2 days later, men in suits came to the Enright family home and led Dale out. He did not resist, the mother cried, and Kate thought that her stepfather belonged where they were taking him, to a hospital where he would go to rehab. Only now it was clear that only a psychiatrist could help him. 2 days before prom, while Kate was trying on her dress at Mrs. Osgood's house, her mother called her. "Your grandfather called. He's coming to pick you up in a week," she said. "Why?" Kate wondered, continuing to admire her reflection. "We're moving to the capital." "You didn't want to?" Kate smiled. "I want to live, Kate. I just want to live." Walking out of the seamstress's entrance and heading home, Kate bumped into Myron again. "What are your plans for the summer?" "Where are you going to college?" he asked, stopping by the girl again. "I don't know. My mother and I are going to the capital to visit my grandfather. I'll go to the capital too and try to work my way into journalism." But as Mr. Leo Bowman said, you have to practice a confident voice. "You should listen less to those who are bad at life," Kate grinned, not mentioning that Mr. Leo Bowman was her grandfather. "All right," laughed Myron. "I'll only listen to you. I think you're promising." Kate laughed too, remembering her grandfather's words with which he characterized the young man. "I suggest we go to the ball together," said Myron, holding out his hand to Kate. "Joy won't survive it," the girl rolled her eyes, mimicking the blonde's reaction. "Or maybe that's what I want." The dress was amazing, the hair perfect, and the mood delightful. Her mother, looking at Kate, could hardly hold back tears of joy at how beautiful her daughter was. The reaction of all the classmates to Kate's appearance, accompanied by Myron, was mixed. Everyone among them whispered, mentioning Joy's name loudly. Joy herself stared, silent, covered in red spots, but saying nothing out loud. Taking Myron by the hand and walking with him into the assembly hall of the school, Kate felt like a Cinderella from a fairy tale, a Cinderella who would no longer have to mop floors at the club and take cutlets from the school cafeteria. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.